Good evening and welcome to The Absolute Truth. I'm Eduardo Neret, filling in for Emerald Robinson for the last time this week. We have breaking news from earlier today. As we reported earlier this week here on The Absolute Truth, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. announced he was dropping out of the presidential race and endorsing Donald Trump. Take a listen.
And now, to throw my support to President Trump, the causes were free speech, the war in Ukraine, and the war on our children.
So I hope the Trump campaign will find a way to use Bobby Kennedy on the campaign trail and give him an opportunity to serve should Trump win the election in November. And Emerald will have much more on Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s role in the Trump campaign in the weeks ahead. But in the meantime, Kamala Harris officially accepted the Democrat nomination for president at the convention last night. And if you listened to her speech, you might have thought that Kamala Harris sounded like a moderate, like she's just any regular old person from middle America. And that was, of course, by design. Kamala Harris is trying to rebrand from the San Francisco liberal that ran the most left-wing presidential campaign in history 5 years ago. That's when she first ran in the Democrat primary. She's trying to rebrand into someone who can resonate with voters in middle America. But don't be fooled. This is the same woman who has been vice president in the most far-left administration in modern history. She wants you to forget that. Not surprisingly, Harris spent chunks of her speech criticizing former President Donald Trump. Take a listen.
What a second Trump term would look like. It's all laid out in Project 2025, written by his closest advisors, and its sum total is to pull our country back to the past. But America, we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back.
We're not going back. We're not going back. Again, what's funny is Harris and the Democrats have spent all week talking as if they haven't been in charge for the last 4 years, as if it's Donald Trump who has been overseeing our country's decline. But if you want to really talk about going back, as an example, if you talk to Americans about prices, their cost of living, their financial situations, many would actually love to go back. Most Americans would love to go back to life as it was in 2019. Just take a look at this chart here as an example, showing the explosive rising housing costs that continue across the country. How about the cost of essential goods? From 2019 to 2024, these costs, food, electricity, gas, energy, basic goods at the grocery store, all through the roof. The Consumer Price Index, which is one of the government's measurements of inflation, shows that prices are up over 20% across the board from 4 years ago. So don't believe their lies that inflation is coming down. That is a complete and total lie, and anyone in the media pushing that doesn't understand how prices work, or they are lying to you. Just because prices are increasing at a slower rate doesn't mean those prices are coming down. No, those prices are continuing to go up. That is a fact. And so later on in her speech, Harris talked about how badly she wanted to enhance the middle class. Here's what she said.
Forward to a future with a strong and growing middle class, because we know a strong middle class has always been critical to America's success. And building that middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
But actually, the middle class under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris has been shrinking rapidly. So we know her stance on the middle class. Now all of a sudden she's saying, if you make me president, I will do the opposite of what I've been doing for the last 4 years. Kamala Harris would have you believe that it is Donald Trump who wants to hurt the middle class. He's the one who wants to raise taxes. Of course, that's obviously not true. And again, if you look at inflation under Joe Biden, prices have exploded. Since 2020, there has been a 35% increase in all US dollars in circulation around the world. Think about that, a 35% increase. The government has printed that much money under Joe Biden to spend on ridiculous and wasteful programs for wealth redistribution, and that has caused inflation. The late great conservative economist Milton Friedman understood that. He put it best when he said the real tax on the American people was US government spending.
True tax that the American people pay is what government spends. If the federal government spends $61 billion more than it takes in, who do you suppose pays the difference? You pay it, I pay it, we pay it as taxpayers. The only thing is, instead of calling that a tax, we pay it in the form of a hidden tax called inflation, or in an even more deeply hidden tax called government borrowing. But both of those are forms of taxation. So nobody has proposed to reduce taxes. What they have proposed is to shift the form of taxation, to rely somewhat less on such direct taxes as income taxes, and somewhat more on such indirect taxes as inflation and borrowing.
And of course, he was right. And finally, it wouldn't have been a Kamala Harris speech if she didn't find time to champion abortion. She followed actually Oprah Winfrey for the night, who said abortion was part of the American dream. She actually said that, Oprah did. And so Kamala did something similar. Here's what she said on the issue of abortion last night.
Friends, I believe America cannot truly be prosperous unless Americans are fully able to make their own decisions about their own lives, especially on matters of heart and home.
Oh yeah, their own decisions about their own lives in heart and home. That's why Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz to be her vice presidential running mate. Remember, Tim Walz was governor of Minnesota during COVID. This is what he did when he cared so much about people making decisions about their lives. This is what he did to restrict people's freedoms during the pandemic.
Oh, there's more. Look at this. They just keep coming.
Oh, go inside! Get inside! Get inside! Get inside! Get in your house now! Let's go! Light him up! Go inside now! Get inside! Get in the house!
Get in!
That is how Kamala Harris and Tim Walz define personal freedom, sending the National Guard to force people in their homes at the threat of death, with firearms, to get people to do what they wanted to do. That's how they will get you to comply, by having you face down the barrel of a gun. And of course, who could forget the many of other things that Kamala Harris has done under Joe Biden? COVID vaccine mandates, lockdowns which were continued early in the Biden administration. But yeah, these people really care about your personal freedoms. Look, the bottom line is, while the DNC may finally be over, Kamala Harris's campaign is just getting started. This week was the playbook. They will play act as moderates, they will lie through their teeth, and they will avoid any tough questions from the media. That's just a given in our current media and political landscape. So Republicans can complain about that all they want, but it's not going to stop Kamala Harris or make her strategy less effective. So President Trump has just 10 weeks until the election. If he and J.D. Vance want any chance at defeating Kamala Harris, they must find a strategy to stop her advance, and they must do so quickly. Up next, one thing that wasn't talked about very much at the convention this week was the issue of education. So what will education look like under a Kamala Harris presidency? We'll talk to one of the rising leaders in education policy in this country next. If you want a snapshot of the sad state of American education, look no further than the state of Illinois. Last year, 67 Illinois schools, and not a single child in any one of those schools tested proficient in math. And in 32 of those schools, not a single child tested proficient in reading. Yet, nearly 70% of students in those schools were able to graduate. Somehow they were able to pass through. So, in effect, we are graduating students who are not capable. And of course, it's not just happening in Illinois. In October of last year, the California state test scores showed that most students were below grade level standards in math and reading. Oregon, too. That state has effectively quit the fight for better education for our kids. The Oregon State Board of Education recently decided to eliminate exit exams for high school graduates. That means students don't have to prove proficiency in English or demonstrate basic math skills before getting a diploma. So why did Oregon make such an absurd decision? Well, officials cited harm to students of color. In other words, minority students weren't meeting proficiency standards, and so it would be racist to hold them back or to require them to take a test before graduating. The left thinks that standards are racist. They think the increase in gap between the wealthy and the poor comes from these tests and these standards. And so they've concluded that the only way to close that gap is not to try to elevate students who aren't performing as well. Rather, it's better to push everybody down, create failing standards and a failing baseline for everyone. And of course, by doing that, you make students unequipped for life. If you ask questions about this or if you challenge this belief system, they accuse you, again, of being a racist. They also don't want Americans asking about where all of our tax money is going in the education system. They don't like that you question how we are spending all of this money, more money than most countries across the world, for failing kids. Ryan Walters is someone who understands that well. As the Oklahoma State Superintendent of Public Instruction, he's been on the front lines for the fight for better education. And so he's going to join us right now to talk about what the state of education is in this country and where it could go under a Kamala Harris presidency. So again, at the DNC this week, we have heard very little about any of Kamala Harris's plans, but notably on the issue of education. Ryan, thanks so much for coming on.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
So actually, before we get to Kamala's plans, I want to start with you a little bit because it's sort of mind-boggling to see a state-level education official, as good as a job as you've been doing, I will say, but the media doesn't really like you very much. And so you've been front and center at national news outlets. They really didn't like when you took office and what you were doing. So give the audience a bit of sense on what you ran on and what you're doing in the state of Oklahoma and why the media and the left hate that so much.
Yeah, like you said, Politico called me the top education crusader in the country. NBC News, they called me the top culture warrior. Well, why do they keep attacking me like this? Well, here's what happened. Oklahoma, we're a state, we elect this position. So I was elected by the people of Oklahoma, and I heard this time and time again. Parents are tired of the woke agenda in their schools. They don't want kids to be told that they hate this country and that this country is evil. They want kids to love the country, to be patriotic, to understand what made this country great. They want high expectations on kids. They want to tell kids, hey, we want you to come to school to learn. So we want discipline in the classroom. We want to bring back that understanding that you control your destiny. So you need to work hard, work ethic. And then lastly, what they wanted is they wanted the teachers' unions out of control. So we pushed the teachers' unions out here in Oklahoma, and we brought parents in. We brought in parent choice. We brought in accountability. We brought in transparency so parents could see everything that was going on in their schools. And the radical left hate it. I am their public enemy number one, and we have fake news media outlets that continue to attack me every day, create fake controversies. But here's the reality. We are moving forward with an education agenda, a reform-minded education agenda, more so than any other state in the country. We are very proud of that, and we're going to continue to lead on education.
If you could a little bit, talk to us about how you found things when you took over. In other words, what kind of power did these teachers' unions have? I think a lot of people saw through COVID, for example, that the teachers' unions were the main leaders in the organization pushing the Democrat Party to keep schools closed, to keep children masked. So they obviously have a lot of social influence. Talk a little bit about that, and then talk about, too, some of the curriculum in the classroom that these organizations were pushing and how you were able to change things once you got into office.
Yeah, no, the teachers' unions exercise a tremendous amount of power, even in red states. As a matter of fact, what I would tell your audience is a lot of times red states, the schools, the education centers are still some of the only places the left still controls. So what we continue to see here in Oklahoma is we said, hey, you can't automatically make teachers join your union. You can't automatically deduct payroll deductions from their paychecks. You can't come in and make them join. What we saw was the union began to react very strongly. They would aggressively bully teachers into joining. They would dictate curriculum at the local level, trying to push for schools to use books like Genderqueer, Flamer, pushing transgender ideology on our kids. At the national conference, and by the way, just 6 weeks ago, Randy Weingarten went out there and declared me one of her top enemies, put my picture on stage next to President Trump's and said she was coming after me. Well, why is she coming after me individually? Because we have stopped this woke agenda in our schools. We want our kids to know the basics, reading, math, science, and real history. And they want to push this agenda and create social justice warriors. And frankly, the Democrat Party uses the teachers union to create social justice warriors and to improve their voting electorate. And you see this just from the union donations. They give over 90% of their funds to Democrat candidates. And these are the things that once you stop these things, they come at you like crazy. We are targeted every day by the radical teachers union. They threaten you. They try to bully you. But here's the reality. I will not back down to a woke mob. I will not let them attack parents in the state of Oklahoma. And because of that, our parents are seeing successes for their kids.
How absurd these arguments are. I mean, they say things like, oh, if you don't want this book in the classroom, if you don't want pornographic books talking to kids about sex, if you don't want third graders to read that, you're for banning books, you're for censorship. And it's like, no, you can still go buy the book in the bookstore as an adult if you want to. We're just saying you can't read it to children. Let me turn here for a second to the left's bigger plans for education across the country. I know education, or at least some parts of it, like what you're doing in Oklahoma, are still localized, are still at the state and local level, which I think is more effective for parents. You give parents the power to choose how their kids are educated. But what are your fears of what education would look like under a Kamala Harris presidency? What is the left's plan, and what can voters, aside from obviously voting for Donald Trump, do in their communities to prevent any federal control or to get more local control back in their hands when it comes to education.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. What you see from Kamala Harris is the belief of more government control. They've used the Department of Education in the past to push things like critical race theory, Common Core, DEI, transgender ideology. And so what you're going to see is that even accelerated under a Kamala Harris presidency, where they will literally come in and threaten your state if you don't allow boys in the girls' bathroom, boys and girls' sports. Folks, that already happened. Joe Biden did that just a few months ago. And I say Joe Biden did that. I mean, Joe Biden doesn't even know where he is right now. So really, Kamala Harris did that just a few months ago. Threatened every state in the country if they didn't allow boys in the girls' bathroom, boys and girls' sports. This is why we have to abolish that federal Department of Education. President Trump has laid that out. He wants it gone. So we will no longer have left-wing bureaucrats dictating to states what the founding fathers would be mortified if they were alive today to see a federal Department of Education. So that has to be abolished. President Trump has vowed to do that. And that power needs to be returned to the states. And then states need to do what we're doing here in Oklahoma. You give that power back to the parents. And you ask what you can do locally. Run for your local school board. Get involved with your kids' classes. Ask questions. Demand that local school provide you that transparency. Make sure that elected officials are holding schools accountable for the parents of the communities. That's the reality. God did not give kids over to government, right? He gave kids to their parents. We have to respect that relationship and understand nobody knows better for kids than their parents, and any kind of education policies have to put parents first in everything that they do.
As I said at the top, we spend more on education than perhaps any other leading country in the world. In some school districts, it's $20,000 per student, and often failing students at failing schools. So how do we solve this problem, both maybe perhaps with the help of the federal government? In other words, if Trump does win the White House, I'm sure Republicans across the country are going to want him to lead the way on education, while, of course, respecting what states and what parents do at a local level. So what is something that can be done? Obviously, money isn't the answer. Right? We could actually probably spend less and get better results. How do we improve standards of American education?
Completely agree. Funding is not the answer. As a matter of fact, the more you fund it without change, you're just funding the same results with a higher price tag, right? So what are the changes that need to take place? On the federal level, abolishing that department is huge to give power back to the states. Secondly, you have to eliminate this anti-American curriculum in the classroom. We cannot allow schools to continue to try to, first of all, remember, we have schools in the country. We even found one here in Oklahoma that was allowing the Chinese Communist Party to come in and develop curriculum, push an agenda in our schools. You can never allow that to happen again in the United States of America. Communist China will not dictate to our kids our history and understanding for our young people. And then lastly, President Trump has called for a universal school choice tax credit. I couldn't be more excited about that. The reality is, no matter where you live, red state or blue state, you should have the ability to send your kids to the school of your choice, whether that's a home school, a private school, a Christian school, a charter school, whatever that may be. Parents know best for their kids. And if the President Trump gets elected and enacts that, then you will unlock the potential of children across the country like never before. And so that is an education agenda that President Trump has advanced. It's the best education agenda and plan the country has ever seen. You enact those things, look at what our country will unlock. It will be unprecedented.
You've touched upon a lot of things in this segment that I think would be effective messages in a campaign, or to parents out there, or to voters who are concerned with the issue of education. But for someone who may be on the fence, for someone who, let's say, is a traditional Democrat parent, Democrat voter, and they're a parent, or maybe they're an independent and they're not super into the MAGA movement, they're not natural conservatives, but again, they're not necessarily going to vote for Kamala Harris. What is one thing you encourage people to say out there to parents like that, to voters like that, who again could perhaps vote for a Republican, maybe on the fence about it? When it comes to the issue of education, what is the one thing that you think is the most effective thing to convince them about why our plan for education is more effective than the left's?
Republicans believe in you, the family. Democrats believe in the government bureaucrat apparatus. I think that appeals to folks, again, across the aisle, middle of the road, folks to understand we are the pro-family party, that our education agenda is about empowering your family and empowering your young person with knowledge, not indoctrination, but true knowledge. So not only can they get a job, they can have a high quality of life with that knowledge that they have and become great citizens in the United States of America. The Democrats want larger government, more bureaucracy, less power for you in the life of your child. I think that is a message that crosses party lines, that gets moderates to understand, okay, the Republicans truly believe in empowering our family. There should be nothing more important for a family than being more involved in their kids' lives and having more decisions there. And I think that's a winning message.
Oh, exactly. I totally agree. I mean, it really comes down to that. It's, do you want control over your child's education? Do you want to have a say, or do you want to give that say, give that authority to some bureaucrat in Washington who knows nothing about you, nothing about your school community, nothing about what your kid is learning in the classroom? So, Ryan Walters, we really appreciate it. We thank you for what you're doing in the state of Oklahoma, and we hope others follow suit and follow your lead. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
So it's been 3 years since the United States' disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and yet in many ways, we still don't really know what happened there. Nor have we examined the effects of that withdrawal on our country and the region. So we'll do a little more of that straight ahead. We just recently marked the 3rd anniversary of America's strategic defeat in Afghanistan. So while the world was focused on the Democrat National Convention in Chicago, Illinois this week, the Taliban were strutting around their brand new military equipment, appraised around $60 billion, that we left behind when we withdrew from that country. And now there are worries that the Taliban could be plotting terrorist attacks in regions across the globe. President Donald Trump, to his credit, has not been able to get over the debacle that was the Afghanistan withdrawal. If there's anything that he is most ashamed of, most embarrassed about for our country since he left office, it is the Afghanistan withdrawal. He has repeatedly pointed out how embarrassing it was for the United States on the world stage, what Joe Biden did. And of course it was. Here was Donald Trump at a rally just a few days ago talking about what he will do to hold our leaders accountable for that withdrawal.
I will ask for the resignations of every single senior military official who touched the Afghanistan disaster. I want their resignations immediately. And I want them on the desk in the Oval Office, the Resolute desk. I want them on at 12 o'clock, Inauguration Day, everybody involved with that disaster. When you have a disaster so stupid as that caused us such problems, you don't know what that's done to the reputation of our country, the Afghanistan disaster. This house cleaning will be a signal to the entire world and America military and everybody else. They want people to be held accountable for failure and incompetence. And it's just not acceptable that something like that could happen.
Again, he's right. He feels that that act brought the United States much shame and embarrassment. And again, it did. Resignations are at the very least of what we should be demanding from those who failed us. They've also failed the Afghan citizens who helped the United States as well. The Biden administration, including Vice President Kamala Harris, has yet to account for the fact that we left behind actual American citizens in that country. They are now at the mercy of the Taliban.
Mr. Secretary, how many American citizens and licensed permanent residents are in Afghanistan today, and are any of them currently being held hostage by the Taliban?
Congressman, there are several Americans who are being detained by the Taliban. We are working to secure their freedom. The families have asked that we protect their identities and don't speak publicly to their cases.
Now, those are being detained. How many other Americans?
How many other Americans? There are approximately, let me put it this way, since August 31st of last year, we have helped about 975 American citizens who wished to leave Afghanistan do so. As we speak, Americans who identify themselves to us, American citizens who identify themselves to us who are in Afghanistan, some of whom have been there since the withdrawal, some of whom went back to Afghanistan. There are about, that we're in contact with, about 175. 44 of them are ready to leave, and we are working to effectuate their departure.
So again, we haven't been able to get those people out. Look, it's not leaving Afghanistan that was the problem. It was the way we left. We left Bagram Air Force Base, which is in a uniquely strategic position close to China. We left behind billions of dollars of our equipment to a terrorist organization. So joining us now to react to all of this is retired United States Marine Corps Major Fred Galvin. He's the author of A Few Bad Men, the true story of U.S. Marines ambushed in Afghanistan and betrayed in America. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Eduardo.
So before we get to the book, and I want to touch upon that in some of those stories, 3 years on, it seems like we still have a lot of unanswered questions about why that went down, what happened. In your view, as someone who served How much of it was a question of leadership? How much of a question was it, lack of preparation? In your view, what was the reason for the failed Afghanistan withdrawal?
Eduardo, this is all on account of poor leadership. Those in the Pentagon wearing 3- and 4-star stars on their collar are not stupid people. They knew exactly what they were doing. And right in the middle of this war, in 2006, you had Lieutenant General at the time, Petraeus, and Lieutenant General Mattis come up with they resurrected the Vietnam era counterinsurgency doctrine. This is the winning hearts and minds. They even came out with this book and a speaker who came out and said the title of this book was 3 Cups of Tea. They made everybody read this. And they hijacked the Hippocratic Oath of first do no harm. So think what signals that sends to a foot soldier on the front lines or commandos who are going in and going after terrorists to do no harm. You're required to have these tribal leader engagements when you have intelligence like we did. And we'll get into what we did in just a second, but they did not at all want our style of aggressive combat operations, which that was actually our mission to do, is conduct aggressive combat operations. But we didn't get the wink and the nod, and I don't really understand when somebody wants to be political and they're in the military, but that's what was going on. And they implemented that failed strategy. They developed a joint doctrine for all services in 2006 and 2007. They made that happen. And Eduardo, that was the beginning of the forever war. And you see all these generals, and I'll start naming names because these people all have the same occupational specialty that I had as well. Infantry officers. These are not science guys. You look at Lloyd Austin, our current commander or Secretary of Defense. He came from Raytheon. He was a 4-star general and down at Central Command in charge of all the Middle East. But he doesn't have a background in high tech or communication or aviation. And the same goes for the previous chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Miley. He's not a financial expert, but he's senior advisor at JP Morgan right now. His predecessor, the former Marine 4-star general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, works at Lockheed Martin on their board of directors. Mattis works for General Dynamic. It's this revolving door with these retired military senior officers who have access and placement to the Pentagon. They have the relationships with the Senate and House Armed Service Committee. And those pictures right there that you're showing, Eduardo, that is the result of over 10 years of these generals going and testifying before Congress and saying we need to stay the course. The Afghan National Security Force is a viable force. They're going to be able to uphold the democracy, the principles of this central government that we're building in Afghanistan. They knew what would happen. 3 years ago, we saw the Taliban go through these Afghan National Security Forces like a hot knife through butter. And we knew that. But these generals went up before Congress and lied repeatedly year after year because they wanted that money, because they wanted to go, which they have, and have these lucrative jobs on these boards, which they're paid a fortune for. And this is going to happen again because we've already seen the precursors where we've closed 7 American embassies. The result of this weakness and the result of us giving money, not just to Iran, which has launched over 200 attacks on American forces in Iraq, we still have forces in Iraq, and our U.S. Navy at sea in the Middle East. And the Houthi rebels have hit 2 of our U.S. flagged container ships. The mainstream media doesn't cover this, but these are all results of weakness. When we cannot use our military to deter aggression, it emboldens our enemy. And that's what's going on right now. And Donald Trump is exactly correct that he needs to hold people accountable. You have to get rid of that cancer that's willing to sacrifice, as we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, over 7,000 American sons and daughters' lives and tens of thousands of them being severely wounded. That's unacceptable. And if they thought that this baloney counterinsurgency hearts and minds doctrine would work, which they went in there and perpetuated that garbage for over 20 years, then they need to put some skin in the game. Send their bride to a bed and breakfast in Bagram out there in Afghanistan and see how long that lasts. Because they knew good and well that strategy would fail. And it did, and they're not held accountable. They just went on and got paid even more money in their retirement.
Well, I want to touch upon that because you mentioned the accountability, and I know this is true across the federal government. There is no accountability, but it would seem to me that a place like the Pentagon, measuring someone's success is very simple, especially in a time of war. Are you getting the job done? Are we safer and more secure? Are American soldiers dying in higher rates abroad, or are they dying at lower rates? I mean, shouldn't be that hard to measure these things. And when I look at American history, whether it's Lincoln firing and going through generals during the Civil War or during World War II, when we held command officers and generals more accountable, why is it that it seems in the modern era these generals seem to fail upward? I mean, you talked about the revolving door between companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon. How is a guy like Lloyd Austin able to keep his job after that withdrawal? I mean, I feel like in a different era in American history, not even that long ago, maybe just a couple decades ago, that person would have resigned the next day, that following Monday. I mean, the president would have demanded all of these people's resignations when something so embarrassing like that happened for the country. And yet now these people continue their jobs. I mean, if for example, if Kamala Harris loses this fall, Lloyd Austin is going to go on to a very cushiony board seat at one of these companies. He's going to be rewarded for that failure. So how did we get here? And of course, Trump has talked about bringing accountability back. But I guess more specifically, how does he go about doing that? Does he have to go through Congress? Can he change the way the Pentagon works? And from your perspective, how could he specifically go about doing that?
Well, he will definitely get a lot of slack from the media and the left, but this is what needs to happen, and he can do it. All these officers work at the pleasure of the President of the United States. It needs to happen. You see the senior individual, the Secretary of Defense, less than 90 days after this slaughter of civilians in Israel happened, and Americans captured, held hostage, and some of which have been killed now, but there's still a few who are hostage. What does Lloyd Austin do? I mean, he's in charge of the military. He knows the rules very well because he was a member of the military and promoted 4 stars. But what did he do in the beginning of January, right after the New Year's, is he goes out and says it's an elective surgery. He gets caught in one lie after the next. But bottom line is, if I had been in the military at that time and I didn't show up for work for one day, Eduardo, I would have been charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for unauthorized absence. If I had lied as he did and said I'm doing remote work, which at the time, for that first week, he was actually at the military hospital there, Walter Reed, and he lied. That is false official statement. You're going to be charged again. But his deputy, she was on leave. She was approved on leave down in the Caribbean. And that's what every American needs to know is who is really calling the shots? Who is there a puppet government? Who are the people that are, if the Secretary of Defense isn't at work for a week and he's having cancer surgery and he's lying about it, that shows you, just like this ticket right now with the Democrats, their vice president, he can't tell the truth. That's no pun on a few good men. You want the truth, you can handle the truth. But right. We have to have leaders that are honest, that have courage. And to answer your question, Eduardo, Donald Trump can and needs to fire. And here's a good example from American history. Right here where I'm at in Pearl Harbor is a site where we were attacked 83 years ago by the largest, most powerful nation, in the Far East, the Empire of Japan, and they hit 8 American military bases in a 2-hour time frame and killed thousands of Americans. But within 3.5 years, we retaliated. We declared war the next day, and our retaliation was swift. It was severe. It took a lot of action, took a lot of coordination. But we didn't have email. We didn't have all the communication systems that we have now. But within 3.5 years, we had an unconditional surrender on the starboard side of the midship of the United States Missouri in Tokyo Bay from the most powerful country in the Far East. And that was with a country that had battleships, aircraft carriers. The Taliban didn't.
And
can do this.
It's just so concerning, too, because, like you say, aside from the fact that Lloyd Austin is lying, aside from the fact that there is no accountability, what happens when we get into an actual war, like a hot war, not one of these proxy wars we're in right now, and then what? And then the Secretary of Defense can just go missing? It's truly astounding. I want to give you a few minutes here. Speaking of a few good men, I want to go to your book, A Few Bad Men. Again, the true story of U.S. Marines ambushed in Afghanistan and betrayed in America. Talk to the audience a little bit about the book and the stories of some of these Marines.
Yes. Well, the opposite of a few good men, I will say you can handle the truth, America, and you need to. And you need to read the book and understand that this was the very first Marine Special Operations Task Force that was organized, that was trained and deployed. We went to Afghanistan, and I'm a guy from eastern Kansas. I don't understand the politics of combat, and hey, just go over there, sit around, lift weights, cooperate, graduate, check the block on a successful combat deployment, and come home, and then you'll get a cushy assignment in Germany or somewhere else of your choice. I don't understand that. We had been going to war, prior to this for 6 years as American forces, and our units prior to this, force reconnaissance, repeatedly going to war in Iraq, and it was a tough fight. Now, at that time, the Taliban had been beaten in Afghanistan because they were doing aggressive kinetic combat operations against the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But then they inject this counterinsurgency doctrine right as we get on the ground there, this winning hearts and minds. This is an immoral strategy for you to send Americans over there, have them patrol through these minefields in the Afghan desert, and then if they get attacked, and I'll get into our situation of exactly what happened, then you have them use restraint. Eduardo, they actually gave medals. Ask your listeners and viewers to look this up, so make sure I'm not lying. Medals were authorized for courageous restraint, that you could engage the enemy, but you didn't. Well, where do you think this eventually lies? Because, then they also had tactics where if there are any civilians around, then you have to break contact and withdrawal. So what do you think that makes the enemy do? They're going to use civilians every time. And they did. And that's the exact same tactics that the terrorists in Gaza, Hamas, are using right now. When it's a simple mathematical equation, when only one side can fight back, well, we know who the winner is going to be. And, just like right now, if we can't figure out, if we want to pay all this money to the United Nations and have NATO be a part of the solution, they can develop, just like in Korea, a demilitarized zone where we move civilians, and anyone with a weapon, they die, but then actually have, just like we have in other wars, fighters fighting fighters. That's what we need. And in Afghanistan, that's what happened on the 4th of March. We went into this town. We had incontrovertible evidence, the intelligence of 4 suicide bombers. And this is a town right on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So we could not go into Pakistan, and that became the Taliban's training sanctuary where they radicalized foreign fighters from around the world and then bring them across this brand new paved road, the first paved road in Afghanistan, which American taxpayers built, or funded, I should say. And so that led to the exponential rise in the production and exportation of poppy and opium, which is what was funding the Taliban, and imported these foreign fighters from around the world. And the first town inside Afghanistan was this village called Badiko. And for everybody's viewing this, let's put in your mind, that's basically the same thing as a Amazon fulfillment center. So they're linking up in that distribution node all of the foreign fighters with their handlers that are going to take them to all parts of Afghanistan, Kabul, Kandahar, Sangin Valley, to fight the Americans and to kill us. And with this new resurgence of radicalized foreign fighters and this new American-made counterinsurgency doctrine that the generals knew what they were doing, that this would start the forever war, it led to, over a dozen more years of fighting something that we knew was designed to just last forever. And leaving like we did, that was, if you leave $60 billion worth of equipment back, and it's okay because all these generals, where are they? Well, they retired, but they're working for the military industrial complex. So that means replenishing this. And if it was a good deal in Afghanistan, the tail wags the dog. The tail in the Pentagon tells the White House, hey, we'll just like a strategy for a publicly traded company, we'll figure this out. With a new administration, guess what we'll do? We'll start a proxy war in Ukraine, just like we did. We'll fund Iran, and they'll attack our forces, and that will require more drones and ships at sea and more money for the military-industrial complex. But let me get back to what happened on 4th of March. So we go into this town, and we saw a complete shift in the baseline of what we saw 3 hours prior at this roadside bazaar where there's women, children, men, elderly. Now all we see is foreign fighters, complete exodus of women and children. And we knew from past engagements what's next when you see this mass exodus. So all we saw was foreign fighters, military age men, fighting age men lined up on the sides of the road. We get our entire patrol into this village. I was communicating because I was on the patrol. I said, hey, watch out. And as soon as that happened, a car bomb, this van filled with mortar rounds, blasting shrapnel, and it was filled with fuel, detonated on our second Humvee, sending fire over 100 feet in the air. And then we immediately got attacked on our left flank on the south side of the road by a sports utility vehicle that had 3 jihadists hanging out of the windows, firing their AK-47s, and that driver was heading straight at our second vehicle that just got blown off in an attempt to finish it off. And we thought everybody in that second Humvee was killed from the explosion. It was a massive fireball. Once they passed through it and the smoke cleared, we saw this vehicle, and 2 of the men in that vehicle, the one in the turret and there was one in the troop compartment. This was different than all the rest of our Humvees. This one was not enclosed. This was our ambulance vehicle. So it had an open air compartment, and gentlemen with a light machine gun stood up, aimed in at these jihadists with a turret gunner as well, and they fired and killed the fighters in that vehicle. But the vehicle driver jumped out of that vehicle and into a ditch and continued to fight us in that ditch. We did not kill him. He actually testified live in our hearing the following year in 2007 from an American base in Afghanistan. I saw him with my own eyes. It's Haji Lawani Commandant is his actual name. We had prepared reports that he was training groups of up to 100 2 days prior in Afghanistan to kill American forces in that town. So, the prosecution was coming after us after we fought our way out. And this is truly, I'm not saying, listen to the title of the book. It's not the American military is bad. It's a few bad men. It's these senior generals that sent us to war. We fight. We're getting engaged in a complex ambush, and then they take us to a war crimes trial. But to go back to that morning, then we started getting shot at on the right side of the road from a riverbed. I said a riverbed. I didn't say a busy market. So these are people firing from static position while others were bounding towards us, and they were leaping and bounding towards us in this riverbed. So we quickly aimed in at them and shot and killed them, but we were still getting shot at from a mountaintop sniper position. Those sniper rounds hit our vehicles. The Army Criminal Investigation later did a forensics on our vehicles. They found that the impacts to our vehicles were from a Soviet Dragunov sniper rifle, which the Air Force, and Eduardo, I did say Air Force. So if, just picture this, if the Navy ship ran ashore, ran aground, they wouldn't send an Air Force colonel to investigate, but they decided to send an Air Force colonel to investigate us. They flew him in from outside the theater, and he had done this botched investigation on a group of Green Berets who are also on a capture kill mission of a known terrorist, shot him in the head with one round. They positively identified him, but this Air Force colonel decided that that was homicide and charged them, these are a Green Beret team, charged the captain and the master sergeant with homicide. So these became the ridiculous rules that enslaved us into this forever war. And we also got trapped in this kill zone, but they dragged a vehicle across the road. A mob swarmed at us. We fired above their heads and drove back to the base where 20 minutes later, 20 minutes, this was already on BBC radio. And then that same day hit New York Times, Washington Post, and then it hit the international media saying that we'd killed women and children. The reports were so ludicrous. They said that we killed 19, wounded 50, that we got out of our vehicles, that we were drunk, that we went door to door, killing men, women, children, elderly, bovine creatures even. It was ridiculous. They said that we returned.
So infuriating. It's so infuriating. I mean, that the rules of engagement were such that to begin with that were preventing people like you from doing your job. And then when you do your job, it's twisted and made to seem like you and many other U.S. service members had committed some crime. Major Fred Galvin, sorry, we're out of time here, but again, the book is A Few Bad Men. I hope people take a look at it to really learn the true story of what the United States' time was in the country of Afghanistan. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Eduardo.
So it feels like we're living in a time of chaos. What can you do to protect yourself? More on that straight ahead. It was just a few weeks ago that a supposedly lone sniper tried to take out Donald Trump at his rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. The former president, and at the time the leading contender in the presidential race, was nearly assassinated before our very eyes. One of his supporters was killed at the rally. So again, it seems like ages ago, and that's in part because the media have worked so hard to memory hole what happened. They've moved on. I mean, again, a former president, and potentially the next president, was nearly killed, and nobody talks about it, nobody cares. That incident underscores, to put it mildly, the chaos of the times we are living in. The country feels like a tinderbox. Lunatics seem like they're on the prowl everywhere, in every major city, and even in rural areas like Butler, Pennsylvania. Just take a look at these scenes from Chicago, as an example, outside the DNC last night.
For any American citizens and Jews, I want you to reflect back in the last 5 years. If you're older than 16, then you remember 2008. You remember every crisis in the last 20 years. Where the heat-licking mother protecting them who at the top have dropped down to the people on the bottom for way too long.
That was the American flag you saw burning. And again, things like that are becoming more and more common across our cities and towns across the country. What do you think people like that would do if they knew they could get away with it? Well, we got a glimpse of what people will do if they can get away with it in 2020, for example, during the summer of George Floyd. You remember David Dorn in St. Louis, Missouri? Vandals killed him during the riots while he was protecting a friend's pawn shop. Dorn was a 77-year-old retired police captain. He had no reason to be there other than the fact that he was a good neighbor and wanted to help his friend. And yet his death was streamed on Facebook Live as if it was some sort of joke or some sort of entertainment. So one thing is clear, is that in times of chaos, people should be thinking of ways to protect themselves and their families. So how can they do that? Michael Letts understands that question. He's a founder, president, and CEO of Invest USA, a grassroots organization that provides communities with bulletproof vests for police officers, among other things. And he joins us now to talk about the threats facing Americans and what we can do in each of our own lives to address those threats. Michael, thanks so much for coming on.
Well, it's a privilege to be with you, Eduardo. We thank you for the opportunity. And you're right, this is a very pressing question for Americans today.
Of course, we're happy to have you. Talk to us a little bit about some of the threats you see. I guess that would be more relevant to, just a regular American in everyday life. And of course, the threats are vast, as I just explained. And then talk to me a little bit about what you think Americans can do to address those threats.
Well, we'll take a look at the root cause to begin with. Violent crime is spiraling out of control, among other things. And of course, there's a lot of policy issues that cause that, from open borders to disregard for backing our thin blue line and for disregard of law in general. But how does that translate to the American citizen? Because of the fact we have so many people now who have a total disrespect for law enforcement, we have such a reduction in the law enforcement population. Just 3 to 4 years ago, we had roughly 1.3 million officers, sworn officers across this country. We're down to around 700,000 now. And that wasn't by happenstance. That's been a planned agenda for this administration to try to reduce the number of law enforcement officers. Why do they want to do that? Because they want to create an atmosphere to where violent crime can spiral, can grow. Why would they want to do that? Well, if they have an increase in violent crime, they know that it causes great fear among the American people. And what they want to do is they want to create an image to the American people that local and state law enforcement are incapable of protecting you. But the federal government is. They want the federal government to be able to take control of law enforcement. They've already said that. They've already proposed that in their budgets. That's why they said 87,000 additional IRS agents. ironic that they wanted IRS agents who are armed and can use a firearm. And the reason they're doing that is to supplement and build their system. They have already said how they plan on handling violent crime. They've been very clear about it. The federal government says violent crime is caused by guns, not by the person that's pulling the trigger of the gun, but by the gun itself. And so their goal and objective is to make sure they disarm the American people so that then you will have no way but to support whatever their agenda is. And we've seen these radical agendas by this administration, agendas that weaponize law enforcement, that weaponize agencies, that if you dare say anything against them, they will come against you and tie you up in court, put you in jail. And that's where we're at. So the American people ask me all across the country as we travel across the country, what can we do about it? Well, there's a number of things that we can do as American citizens. First and foremost, understand that it will only get worse as we continue to lose law enforcement. We have to stop the bleeding and the loss of law enforcement officers. There's only one way to do that. And that's we as the American citizens have to show our support for law enforcement first and foremost. You know, gone are the days to where you can think that law enforcement will protect you. Law enforcement is no longer capable of doing that. We are too battered, too thin, too small in number to be able to accomplish that objective. What we can do is figure out what happened and help solve it afterwards. But if you're going to protect yourself and your family and your loved ones, you and you alone are going to be responsible, have to be able to do that. That means first and foremost, you need to own a firearm and you need to know how to use it. It won't do you any good to have it if you don't know how to use it. Second of all, you need to demonstrate to the law enforcement officers that we have left. Remember, we were actually down to 700,000. We back you and support you. We want to restore law and order in this country. We respect you. This small fringe element that's trying to destroy you does not represent the spirit of the American people. And so if you can, help provide them the necessary equipment to come home safe to their families, vests, or just simply tell an officer thank you. Next time you see one, say thank you for your willingness to serve. You know, they put their lives on the line without appreciation. It's amazing that anybody wants to wear a badge now, but they do. They need to be shown that appreciation.
I was going to say, I don't know why anyone would want to serve right now, just with how, you know, police are being treated, not just by obviously criminals and things like that, but from the very leaders who are elected to protect them. I mean, with things getting rid of like qualified immunity, I mean, if a cop takes action, maybe a split second between saving his life or saving an innocent's life and perhaps, you know, harms or kills a culprit or a criminal, then this cop is put on trial, arrested, could be thrown in prison. So there's not a lot of incentives to be a police officer. What are some things that we can do, I guess, legally in terms of passing laws to help incentivize police officers? I mean, of course, you can give them higher pay and things like that, but do you see a lack of certain protections? And we've seen trends in the last few years, the left wants to remove a lot of those protections. So how do we bring them back?
Well, you've raised a great point, Eduardo. And here is the point. What do we do to encourage and to build back the force that we have to where it is a trending force as it used to be in the past? One of the first things we need to do is remind politicians, you're a politician. You're not a cop, okay? That means if you've never worn the badge, you've never been in the cruiser before, stop trying to pass regulations and ordinances that tell cops how to do their job. You know, it's interesting. We've got them doing it all across the country. Well, you have to be careful how much force you use, or you can't use your left hand, you only have to use your right hand, etc. You know, if they could even remember all that, it would be amazing. You'd have to pay them millions just to be able to have the brain capacity to remember what you're trying to say. But what you need to understand is this: when you're in a life and death situation, you want to make sure you're coming home to your family. You're not the criminal who's been killing people. We're not more concerned about his rights than you are the victim's rights and the police department's rights. That's the first thing we have to get in line. Second thing we have to do is realize how potentially harmful and how devastating it is for mass media to portray law enforcement the way they're doing. Oh, they're all a bunch of racists, they're buffoons, they don't deserve respect. What you have done is not just hurt the guy on the street right now with a badge. You've made it so that nobody else will wear a badge in the future. So this younger generation that's coming up, they shy away from it. They don't want to be a cop. They don't want to be a public servant. So tell me, who's going to fill the shoes of the people that are leaving, that are retiring, or that you're forcing out of service? You're going to ultimately get what you're looking for, and that is there will be no one to wear the badge, and we will have nothing but lawlessness in this country. A country cannot survive if that's the way we mold it out to be. So make sure that what we do first and foremost is get politicians to understand their role and that is to make sure that our law enforcement officers know how to protect themselves and their community. They're supported in doing so, and that we portray them in the light that they so rightly deserve. How many people do you know that are willing to take a bullet for somebody that hates them just because of the fact that they want to make sure their community is safe? Not many, I can assure you.
Yeah, and like you said, it's just shocking how, I mean, I totally agree with you that Americans should learn how to protect themselves and should take that accountability into their own hands. But the fact that we've gotten to a point that we can't even trust the government to do that, that's a complete violation of the social contract. I mean, we all pay taxes. What is this? I mean, that is the most basic function and duty of government. And if they can't protect us, then the whole thing collapses. Michael Lutz, thanks so much for coming on. Again, he's the president, founder, and CEO of Invest USA. If you want to learn more about the organization and how you can help law enforcement in your community, check out their organization. Michael Lutz, thanks so much.
Thank you, Eduardo. God bless, and God bless America.
All right, and that's about it for us tonight. And that's about it for me hosting here all week, The Absolute Truth. It's been a blast. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'll see you again next time.